The joyous cacophony of the Galactic Gourmet Gala aboard the luxury starliner Celestial Empress was violently punctuated by a blinding emerald flare as disruptor fire slammed against the grand observation dome, the force of it sending crystalline shards of plasteel raining down like malevolent confetti. Amidst the sudden screams and the percussive thud of emergency blast shields, Lyra, known to the ship's manifest only as an exacting food critic from a minor rimworld, felt a peculiar, exquisite thrill not from the chaos, but from the sudden, intense spike of creative frustration and stark terror radiating from the celebrated human chef whose masterpiece gala was now a disaster zone. She was unaware that this chef Kai, his hands now reflexively steadying a toppling ice sculpture of a Celestial ice swan rather than reaching for a weapon, had once charted the dying heart of nebulae and the fractured bones of worlds as an exo-geologist, nor did he know that her serene, analytical gaze hid a mind that could commune with the ghosts and machines and spoke the long-dead language that could awaken sleeping gods of technology. The Celestial Empress, a vessel synonymous with opulence and interstellar cruising, was moments before a symphony of sensory delights. Its grand ballroom, now the epicenter of panic, boasted panoramic views of the Zidonian Nebula, a swirling tapestry of cosmic dust and nascent stars. Kai, head chef and rising star in the galactic culinary scene, had been basking in the glow of approbation. His latest creation, a deconstructed nebula nectar tart, was the talk of the sector. He moved with a practiced, almost antsy energy. His dark hair slightly disheveled from the heat of the galley, his eyes, usually sharp and assessing, crinkling at the corners with genuine, if fleeting, pleasure. He was a man of precision, of controlled artistry, a stark contrast to the vast, chaotic beauty he secretly yearned to explore among the stars again. His impatience, usually a tightly coiled spring beneath his professional calm, was for once blessedly absent. Lyra, representing the gastronomic gazette of Silos, had been a thorn in his side for the past 3 days. Her critiques were laser-focused, her palate unnervingly perceptive, and her presence unsettling. She was tall for a human presenting biped, with skin the color of twilight, and eyes that seemed to shift in hue from amethyst to silver depending on the light. Or perhaps, Kai often thought, his mood. Her species, the Fluxions, were rumored to be empathic, but Lyra projected an aura of cool detachment. She moved with an almost liquid grace, her attire simple yet elegant, a stark contrast to the flamboyant fashions of the other gala attendees. What Kai didn't know was that Lyra wasn't just critiquing his food, she was subtly, carefully feeding. Fluxions, a rare and often misunderstood species, derived sustenance not from proteins or carbohydrates, but from the complex emotional energies of other sentient beings. Creative frustration, the sweet agony of artistic endeavor, the bittersweet pang of melancholy, the sharp tang of focused ambition, these were the delicacies her physiology craved. Kai, with his perfectionism and barely suppressed yearning for something more, was an unwitting gourmet feast. Her current assignment had been to review Chef Kai. The Celestial Empress was merely a convenient location. She found his emotional signature potent. The gala, the culmination of his efforts, was a banquet for her. When the first disruptor blast hit, the wave of collective fear was almost overwhelming, a crude, unrefined jolt. But through it, she felt Kai's specific brand of shock, not just fear, but the sharp, metallic taste of a meticulously constructed reality shattering. It was, in a twisted way, delicious but also alarming. This was not the subtle emotional gastronomy she preferred. This was raw, primal, and dangerous. Kai, despite the chaos, moved with an ingrained calm. Emergency protocols! Everyone to the designated safe zones! Follow the floor lighting, his voice, usually reserved for issuing orders in the galley, cut through the rising tide of panic. He wasn't a security officer, but years of navigating treacherous asteroid fields and unstable planetary surfaces had honed his crisis response. His impatience now manifested as a clip deficiency. He saw Lyra, standing strangely still amidst the scrambling passengers, her head tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. Her usually pale skin seemed to shimmer faintly. "Critic, this way!" he yelled, gesturing towards an emergency corridor that was miraculously still clear. Lyra's gaze met his. For a fleeting moment he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, an echo of the emerald disruptor fire. "The primary shield generator, it's failing. The resonance frequency is off," she said, her voice surprisingly clear over the din. Kai blinked. How could she possibly know that? "Just move," he snapped, his patience already fraying. He grabbed her arm, intending to pull her along. The contact was like a mild electric shock. He felt a dizzying array of impressions: the cool, smooth texture of her skin, an undercurrent of immense, ancient sorrow, and a bizarre, intuitive understanding of the ship's failing systems, as if he could suddenly see the energy conduits, like veins beneath its metallic skin. He stumbled back unnerved. Before he could process it, a second blast rocked the ship, far more powerful than the first. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into terrifying red emergency lighting. Alarms blared, a cacophony of impending doom. The ship lurched violently, a wounded behemoth crying out in protest. Through a cracked viewport, Kai saw the aggressor's sleek, black cruisers, bearing the insignia of the K'tharr Hegemony, a known splinter faction, puritanical and aggressive, from the usually benevolent Galactic Federation. They were known for their ruthless efficiency and their disdain for what they called galactic decadence. Targeting a luxury liner was extreme, even for them. "They're not just raiding," Lyra murmured, her eyes wide, fixed on the K'tharr ships. "They're searching." "Searching for what?" Kai demanded, pulling her towards the escape pods. "We need to get out of here?" Suddenly, a section of the hull near them imploded, showering them with debris. Kai threw himself over Lyra, shielding her with his body. The roar was deafening. When the dust settled, he pushed himself up, coughing. Lyra was beneath him, her eyes wide, a faint silver glow emanating from her hands, which were pressed against a damaged control panel on the wall. The panel, moments before sparking and dead, now flickered with life. A schematic of the ship's escape pod bay glowing faintly. Pod 7, still viable. But the launch mechanism is stuck. She whispered, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw her fingers trace invisible lines in the air, a gesture of almost ritualistic focus. The schematic on the panel brightened, though the release clamps are misaligned. A micro-fracture in the guidance system. Kai stared. This was beyond any food critic's ken. "How do you know that?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her eyes seemed to look through the panel, into the machinery beyond. "I feel it. The flow is wrong. The machine is in pain." Before Kai could question this bizarre statement, another explosion, closer this time, shook the deck. The K'tharr were boarding. He could hear the distinct thrum of their magnetic boots. "No time? We go now." He grabbed a heavy fire suppressant cylinder. "Cover me!" He moved to the escape pod access hatch, Lyra a strange, silent shadow behind him. Her earlier statement about the failing shield generator, her current diagnosis of the escape pod, it was too accurate, too specific. This, critic, was far more than she appeared. As he wrestled with the manual override for the pod bay door, a K'tharr boarding party rounded the corridor, their energy rifles raised. Intruders. One of them barked, a harsh, guttural sound. Kai braced himself, but Lyra moved with astonishing speed. She stepped in front of him, her hands outstretched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air around her shimmered. The K'tharr soldiers paused, their helmeted heads tilting in confusion. Instead of two figures by an escape pod, they now saw a gaping hole breach, venting atmosphere into space. The illusion was crude, flickering at the edges, but in the dim, chaotic light, it was enough. "What the?" One soldier muttered, lowering his rifle slightly. "It's a trap, atmospheric breach." Another yelled, already backing away. Kai stared dumbfounded as the K'tharr soldiers hesitated, then retreated down the corridor, shouting warnings to their comrades. The illusion dissolved, leaving Lyra pale and trembling slightly. "Limited range complexity drains me," she panted, leaning against the bulkhead. "UU Project Illusions," Kai managed, his mind reeling. Exo-geologist, chef, and now accomplice to an illusionist. His life was taking a sharp left turn into the utterly bizarre. "Fluxion biology," she said, as if that explained everything. She pushed herself upright. "The pod, we need to go. Now. They won't be fooled for long." Kai, his initial shock giving way to a grudging admiration and a healthy dose of self-preservation, nodded. He finally wrenched the escape pod door open. Inside, the small craft was cramped but functional. As they scrambled in, the Celestial Empress gave a final, shuddering groan. Warning lights flashed across the pod's console. "Hull breach critical. Gravitic integrity failing. Strap in," Kai yelled, already hitting the launch sequence. He glanced at Lyra. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving silently. He wondered if she was praying, or perhaps, given her earlier performance, reprogramming the pod's trajectory with her mind. The pod shot out into the void just as a massive internal explosion ripped through the midsection of the Celestial Empress. The beautiful starliner, a beacon of galactic luxury, began to break apart, its lights winking out one by one, a dying constellation. Debris rained around their small craft. They were looking for something specific. Lyra repeated, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the fiery death of the liner. Something valuable enough to destroy a ship like that, and everyone on it. Kai piloted the escape pod through the debris field, his chef's precision now applied to navigating a minefield of superheated metal. His impatience was a live wire, urging him to get clear, to find safety. Any idea what? Lyra turned to him, her shifting eyes holding an unreadable expression. Perhaps, something that can control precursor technology. Something or someone. The pod's proximity alarm blared. A K'tharr scout ship, small and fast, was peeling off from the main fleet, heading directly for them. They saw us launch! Kai swore, pushing the engines to their maximum. The tiny craft shuddered under the strain. They won't give up easily. Lyra said, her voice tight. If they suspect we know something. The K'tharr ship fired. A glancing blow rocked the pod, sending sparks showering from a damaged conduit. The main navigation system went dark. Great! Just great! Kai grumbled, wrestling with the manual controls. Any more tricks up your sleeve, Miss Critic? Lyra closed her eyes again. He could feel a strange coolness emanating from her. There's a planet Class M, barely charted. Dense EM interference in the upper atmosphere. It might shield us. But the gravitational currents are treacherous. How do you know that? Kai asked, exasperated. I see the pathways, the safe currents. She opened her eyes, a faint silver light in their depths. Trust me. Kai hesitated for a bare fraction of a second. His analytical mind screamed against it, but the K'tharr were gaining. He looked at her, at the quiet certainty in her strange, luminous eyes. His gut, the same gut that told him when a souffle was about to fall or when a seismic fault was about to give, told him to listen. All right, navigator. Show me the way. The K'tharr scout ship fired again, a near miss that buffeted their pod violently. Warning lights flashed across the console, atmospheric entry imminent, trajectory unstable. They were falling, not flying, towards the unnamed planet below. The journey through the atmosphere was a brutal, jarring inferno. Kai fought the controls, his knuckles white, his calm under pressure strained to its absolute limit. Lyra, beside him, was a strange beacon of stillness, her eyes closed, murmuring soft, alien syllables that seemed to resonate with the protesting shriek of the pod's failing systems. He felt those syllables, more than heard them, a vibration deep in his bones, a sense of ancient, powerful words shaping the chaos around them. The ground came up to meet them with bone-jarring force. Darkness. Kai awoke to the acrid smell of burnt wiring and damp earth. His head throbbed. He unstrapped himself, his body aching. The escape pod was a wreck, half buried in what looked like a colossal, bioluminescent fungal forest. Giant, pulsating mushrooms cast an eerie blue-green glow on the crash site. The air was thick, humid, and alive with the chirping and buzzing of unseen creatures. Lyra was slumped in her seat, unconscious. He checked her pulse, faint, but steady. Her skin was cool to the touch, almost cold. He gently shook her. Lyra, wake up. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, now a soft, diffused silver, focused on him slowly. Well, we made it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Looks like it, Kai said, grimacing as he surveyed the damage. Though, made it, might be an overstatement. The pod's totaled. Comms are out. We're stranded. Lyra slowly sat up, wincing. She looked out at the alien landscape, her expression unreadable. This world, it feels old. And wounded. She pressed a hand to her temple. The emotional signature is chaotic. Pain, fear, but also a deep, resonant watchfulness. Kai frowned. Emotional signature. Right, the emotion eating. He wondered what this planet offered her. He felt a pang of his own creative frustration, a master chef reduced to a castaway. He hoped she wasn't currently feasting on his despair. My species were sensitive to psychic emanations. This planet, it's strong, she explained, her voice still weak. She took a few deep breaths, and a little color returned to her cheeks. The K'tharr, do you think they followed us? Their scout ship was damaged too, if I remember correctly, and this atmosphere is a mess of interference. We might have some time, Kai said, his practical exo-geologist mind already assessing their situation. First, we need to salvage what we can. Water, medkit, any functioning tech. His impatience was already kicking in. They couldn't just sit here. They spent the next few hours rummaging through the wreckage. Kai's calm, methodical approach, a holdover from meticulous geological surveys, helped them organize the salvage. Lyra, surprisingly, proved adept at coaxing flickers of life from damaged equipment. She'd hold a broken datapad, her brow furrowed in that strange concentration he'd seen on the Empress, and sometimes a light would flicker, or a diagnostic screen would briefly illuminate. He saw her touch a sparking power cell, her fingers tracing patterns on its casing, and the sparking subsided, the cell humming with a faint, stable energy. "How are you doing that?" he finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Lyra looked up, her hand still on the power cell. "I listen to it, feel its rhythm. Sometimes, if it's not too broken, I can persuade it to work again. My people call it tech shamanism. It's an old way." "Tech shamanism," Kai repeated, shaking his head. "Illusions, emotional vampirism, and now machine whispering." Lyra was a collection of improbable realities. "My geology degree didn't cover that." A faint smile touched Lyra's lips, the first he'd seen. Perhaps it should have. "The universe is more than rocks and chemical reactions, Chef Kai." "Just Kai is fine," he said. Given the circumstances, he managed to retrieve a functional water purifier, a basic mech kit, and a surprisingly intact emergency shelter kit. Lyra salvaged a multi-tool and, crucially, a short-range distress beacon, though its power cell was nearly depleted. As twilight began to fall, casting long, strange shadows from the giant fungi, the temperature dropped sharply. The sounds of the alien forest intensified, a chorus of clicks, whistles, and deep guttural rumbles that were distinctly unsettling. "We need to find a more defensible position for the night," Kai said, shouldering their meager supplies. His exo-geologist training was kicking in hard now. Analyzing terrain, looking for resources, assessing threats, it felt more natural than composing a 7-course tasting menu. Lyra nodded, her gaze sweeping the glowing forest. "There's a cave system to the north. I can feel the echo of empty space." "You can feel caves now too?" Kai asked, a hint of his usual impatience in his tone, though it was tinged with a reluctant reliance. "It's all energy, Kai," she said softly. "Everything has a signature." They trekked through the increasingly alien landscape. Giant, iridescent insects flitted between the mushroom stalks, and strange, 6-legged creatures with glowing eyes watched them from the shadows. Kai, despite his unease, found a part of him captivated. This was the kind of raw, unexplored world he'd once dreamed of charting. The cave Lyra had sensed was nestled at the base of a rocky outcrop. It was shallow, but dry and defensible. As Kai set up the emergency shelter, a thin, self-inflating dome, Lyra sat near the cave entrance, her eyes closed. He noticed she was pale again, a slight tremor in her hands. "Are you all right?" he asked, pausing in his work. "I'm hungry," she admitted, her voice faint. The crash, the fear, it was too much, too crude. "I need something more refined, sustaining." Kai felt a sudden, awkward guilt. He was a chef, his life dedicated to nourishing others. But how did one prepare a meal of creative frustration or complex melancholy? What do you need?" Lyra looked at him, her silver eyes searching. "Tell me about something you poured your heart into, something that frustrated you, but that you were proud of. Or a time you felt a deep, quiet sadness, a beautiful ache." Kai stared at her. This was the strangest dinner request he'd ever received. He thought for a moment, his mind going back not to his culinary triumphs, but to his earlier life. There was this one survey on Xylos Minor. We were mapping subterranean fault lines. The planet was geologically unstable, constantly shifting. For weeks, I wrestled with the seismic data, trying to build a predictive model. It was infuriating. The patterns were there. I knew they were, but they kept eluding me. I barely slept. Just charts, equations, simulations, and endless, grinding frustration. He paused, remembering the sheer mental exhaustion. But then, one morning, watching the twin suns rise over the fractured canyons, it clicked. I saw the underlying rhythm, the deep structure of the planet's stress. It was beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. The model worked. We were able to predict a major quake, evacuate a small research outpost just in time. He looked at Lyra. She was watching him intently, her expression soft. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer surrounded her. The pallor in her cheeks had lessened. "Thank you, Kai," she whispered. That was nourishing. He felt a strange warmth spread through him, a sense of connection that was both unnerving and not unpleasant. He had fed her in a way, and in sharing that memory, that frustration and eventual triumph, he felt a surprising sense of release himself. The night passed uneventfully, punctuated only by the alien sounds outside their shelter. Kai found he couldn't sleep easily. He kept thinking about Lyra, about her strange abilities, her unique needs. She was an enigma, a survivor like him, and she had, in her own way, saved them both multiple times already. The next morning, Lyra seemed stronger. "We need to find a high point," she said, to use the beacon. "And I sense the others, not K'tharr, something older. Wary, locals," Kai asked, his interest piqued. First contact scenarios were always complex. "Perhaps," Lyra replied. "Their emotional signature is faint, shielded. But it's there. Like embers in the ash. Their journey took them up a steep, vine-choked incline. The gravity was slightly higher than Earth standard, and the air thinner at this altitude. Kai, relying on his field experience, found a game trail that made the ascent easier. Lyra, despite her slender build, moved with an effortless grace, seeming to anticipate loose rocks and treacherous footing. Several times, she warned him of unstable ground, just moments before he would have stepped on it. Her tech shamanism apparently extended to the planet itself. They reached a windswept plateau just as the planet's primary, a large orange star, reached its zenith. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of the bioluminescent forest stretching to a hazy mountain range in the distance. "This is it," Kai said, pulling out the distress beacon. "Let's hope someone is listening." He activated it. A faint, pulsing light emanated from the device, accompanied by a barely audible ping. The power cell indicator was already dropping. "It will take time," Lyra said, her gaze sweeping the horizon. Suddenly she stiffened. "They're here?" Kai followed her gaze. Emerging from the dense foliage at the edge of the plateau were three figures. They were tall and slender, their bodies covered in what looked like woven moss and bark. Their faces were elongated, with large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb the light. They carried long, spear-like implements made of some kind of dark, polished wood. They moved with a silent, fluid grace, their expressions unreadable but conveying a deep, ancient wariness. "The locals, I presume," Kai muttered, instinctively placing himself slightly in front of Lyra. He held his hands up, palms open. "Mean no harm." One of the figures, slightly taller than the others, stepped forward. It made a series of soft, clicking sounds, its head tilted. Lyra listened intently. "They are the K'tharr," Lyra said softly. "The caretakers of this world. They say we disturbed the sleeping song of the planet." "Sleeping song?" Kai asked. Before Lyra could translate further, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low rumble grew into a deafening roar. The K'tharr looked alarmed, their serene expressions cracking. One of them pointed towards the distant mountains, chattering rapidly in their clicking language. "The mountain, it's awakening," Lyra translated, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. "It's not a mountain, it's a volcano!" "A massive one." The crash, Arpad. Perhaps it triggered something. This was the natural disaster, writ large. Kai's exo-geologist senses went on high alert. He could feel the deep earth tremors now, a familiar, terrifying vibration. Ash and smoke began to plume from the distant peak, a dark stain against the orange sky. "We need to get to lower ground, away from the ashfall, find shelter," Kai yelled, his calm under pressure now a focused urgency. The K'tharr were already retreating, beckoning them to follow. There was no time for formal introductions or delicate first contact protocols. Survival was the only imperative. The descent was chaotic. The tremors grew stronger, dislodging rocks and sending dust plumes into the air. The K'tharr, though clearly frightened, moved with a desperate speed, navigating the treacherous terrain with an instinct born of generations. Kai and Lyra struggled to keep up. Lyra stumbled, her ankle twisting on a loose rock. Kai caught her, his arm instinctively going around her waist to support her. The contact, even in the midst of crisis, sent that strange jolt through him again, a fleeting awareness of her inner turmoil and a surprising resilience. "I'm okay," she gasped, leaning on him for a moment before regaining her footing. Her face was smudged with dirt, her silver eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, almost exhilarated focus. He realized she was feeding the fear of the K'tharr, his own adrenaline-fueled anxiety, the planet's agony. It was a maelstrom of potent emotion. They followed the K'tharr into a narrow ravine, the rock walls offering some protection from the increasingly heavy ashfall. The sky was darkening ominously. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur. The K'tharr led them to a hidden cave entrance, concealed behind a curtain of vines. Inside, the air was cooler, cleaner. The cave system was extensive, a network of tunnels and chambers illuminated by phosphorescent moss clinging to the walls. Other K'tharr were gathered here, elders, young ones, their large, dark eyes filled with apprehension. One of the K'tharr elders, his bark-like skin deeply wrinkled, approached them. He spoke in the clicking language, his gaze fixed on Lyra. Lyra listened, then turned to Kai. He is Oran, their elder shaman, Lyra explained. He says the great sleeper has been disturbed. Our arrival, the Skay fire metal, was the final catalyst. He says this has happened before, long ago, when others came from the stars. Others? Kai asked. Precursors. He says there is a place, a sanctuary deep within the mountain, protected by the old ones. But the way is dangerous, and the mountain is angry. Lyra continued. He also senses something different about me. He says I carry the whisper of the star song, an echo of the old one's language. Kai looked at Lyra, a new understanding dawning. Her tech shamanism, the strange syllables she'd uttered during the crash, was it connected to these old ones? Suddenly, a powerful tremor shook the cave, dislodging rocks from the ceiling. Screams echoed through the chambers. The K'tharr were terrified. Oran looked at Lyra, a desperate plea in his ancient eyes. He spoke again, more urgently this time, gesturing towards a specific tunnel. He says there is a machine, an old device of the ones who came before, that might calm the mountain's fury, or at least shield this sanctuary. But it has slept for millennia. None of them know how to wake it. Lyra translated, her voice tight with tension. He believes, he hopes that I can. Kai looked at Lyra. The fate of these people, perhaps their own survival, now rested on her, tech shamanism, and this mysterious, star song. Can you do it? Lyra met his gaze, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, quickly replaced by a steely resolve. I don't know, but I have to try. The song of this device, it's faint, but I can feel it. It calls to something within me. This was it. Their forced proximity had led them here, to this desperate gamble. Trust was no longer a question, it was a necessity. Kai nodded. All right. What do we need to do? Oran, understanding Kai's assent, led them deeper into the cave system. The air grew warmer, the smell of sulfur more pronounced. The tremors were almost constant now. They reached a vast cavern, dominated by a colossal, crystalline structure embedded in the rock. It hummed with a faint internal light, intricate geometric patterns pulsing slowly across its surface. It was clearly of non-K'tharr origin, ancient and powerful. This was precursor technology. This is the heart of the mountain. Lyra breathed, her eyes wide with awe. The device Oran spoke of. She approached it slowly, reverently. The K'tharr watched from a distance, a mixture of fear and hope on their faces. Lyra placed her hands on the cool, crystalline surface. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kai watched, his own anxieties momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sense of profound anticipation. He could feel a subtle shift in the air around Lyra, a buildup of energy. The faint silver glow he'd seen before now enveloped her. Pulsing in time with the light from the precursor device, she began to speak. Not in galactic standard, nor in the K'tharr clicks, but in a language that resonated deep within Kai's chest, a series of flowing, melodic sounds that felt both alien and profoundly familiar. It was the language he'd heard her murmur in the escape pod, the language of the star song. As she spoke, the patterns on the crystal pulsed faster, brighter. The humming intensified, becoming a resonant chord that vibrated through the very rock beneath their feet. Kai realized he wasn't just an observer. Lyra was drawing on something, and he felt a strange pull, a sense that his own focused attention, his silent encouragement, was somehow contributing to the energy she was channeling. He remembered her feeding on his creative frustration. Was this similar? Was she drawing on the collective hope and fear in this cavern? The process was clearly draining Lyra. Her breath came in ragged gasps, sweat beaded on her forehead. But her voice, though strained, never faltered, the ancient words pouring from her with an undeniable power. Kai wanted to tell her to stop, to rest, but he knew she wouldn't. She was locked in a communion with this ancient machine. Suddenly, a new sound intruded, the distinct whine of energy weapons charging, followed by harsh commands in the guttural K'tharr tongue. They found us? Kai yelled, spinning around. K'tharr soldiers, at least a dozen of them, were pouring into the cavern from a side tunnel, their black armor stark against the glowing moss. They must have tracked the beacon before it failed, or perhaps their damaged scout ship had landed nearby. The female? Seize the female? Commander Varkos wants her alive? One of them barked. Kai grabbed the heavy multi-tool, the closest thing he had to a weapon. Lyra, we have company. Lyra didn't open her eyes, but her voice grew stronger, more urgent. The crystal flared with an intense blue light. A deep, resonant hum filled the cavern, pushing back against the tremors of the volcano. The ground beneath them seemed to stabilize slightly. The K'tharr advanced, firing warning shots that ricocheted off the cavern walls. The K'tharr people cowered, but Orin stood his ground, chanting in his own tongue, a counterpoint to Lyra's ancient song. Kai moved to intercept the K'tharr, positioning himself between them and Lyra. His mind raced. He was no soldier, but he knew geology. He knew stress points leverage. He saw a cluster of loose stalactites directly above the advancing K'tharr. A long shot, but Lyra, can you create a distraction? Something big. He yelled over the din. Lyra's voice hitched for a moment, then resumed its powerful cadence. The air around the K'tharr soldiers shimmered violently. Suddenly, the floor beneath them seemed to writhe, taking on the appearance of a nest of giant, snapping rock vipers. The K'tharr, caught off guard by the vivid, terrifying illusion, hesitated, some of them firing wildly at the phantom creatures. It was the opening Kai needed. He hurled the multi-tool like a discus at a precariously balanced rock formation near the stalactites. It struck with a dull thud. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan, the formation shifted, and a cascade of heavy stalactites rained down on the K'tharr. Several soldiers were hit, crying out as they fell. Others scrambled back, their disciplined formation breaking. The illusion of the rock vipers vanished. Lyra's energy clearly focused on the primary task. The blue light from the crystal intensified, bathing the cavern in an ethereal glow. A wave of calming energy pulsed outwards, and the violent tremors from the volcano seemed to lessen, becoming a distant, muffled drumbeat. But the K'tharr were regrouping. A larger, more heavily armored figure strode forward, Commander Varkos, presumably. He surveyed the scene, his helmeted gaze fixing on Lyra. Impressive, Fluxion. Your reputation precedes you, the tech shaman of a dead race, and the last speaker of the Cipher of Ancients. You will be invaluable to the Hegemony, Cipher of Ancients. So that was what her language was called. Varkos raised a complex-looking weapon. No games. Surrender, and the primitives will be spared. Lyra's eyes snapped open. They were blazing with silver fire. Never, she cried, her voice amplified by the resonating crystal. She spoke a single, sharp word in the ancient language, a word that felt like a command to the very fabric of reality. The crystal pulsed once, violently. A shield of pure energy, shimmering and translucent, snapped into existence around Lyra and the device. Varkos's energy blast slammed into it, dissipating harmlessly. Kai stared in amazement. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. Lyra was not just a tech shaman, she was a force of nature. The K'tharr, frustrated, began firing indiscriminately. Kai saw Orin fall, struck by a stray blast. A wave of grief and anger, raw and potent, washed over Lyra. Kai felt it too, a sympathetic echo. He saw her falter, the shield flickering. She was feeding on the intense emotions, but the sorrow was almost too much. Lyra! Focus! Kai yelled. He knew instinctively that her control was wavering. He needed to give her something else, something to anchor her. He thought of his own deep-seated frustration, not with a geological puzzle this time, but with the K'tharr, with the senseless violence, with his own helplessness. He focused on that feeling, pouring it out, a silent offering. He felt a connection snap into place, stronger than before. It wasn't just her drawing from him. It was a two-way current, a sharing of resolve. Lyra's form solidified, the shield around her strengthening, flaring with renewed power. Her silver eyes met his, and in them, he saw not just gratitude, but a dawning understanding, a nascent affection that mirrored his own growing feelings. The device, it's stabilizing the geothermal activity. Lyra said, her voice strained but firm. But I can't hold this shield and maintain the dampening field indefinitely. We need to stop them. Commander Varkos, enraged, ordered his troops to find a way around the shield. Some K'tharr started trying to scale the cavern walls, seeking a higher vantage point. Kai's mind raced. The precursor device was clearly the key. But it was also Lyra's anchor, the nexus of all realities. He murmured, the name surfacing from some forgotten lecture on fringe xenoarchaeology. Precursor tech of this magnitude, it often taps into interdimensional weak points. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. The nexus, yes. This world is a conduit. This device, it regulates that connection, keeps it stable. If the K'tharr gained control of it, they could potentially access the universal constructor. Kai finished, a cold dread gripping him. That mythical device, capable of creating anything from raw energy. In the hands of the K'tharr Hegemony, it would be a galaxy-ending threat. They weren't just after you, Lyra. They were after this planet, this device, as a key. We'll have to destroy it, Lyra said, her voice filled with a sudden, terrible resolve. If it means this world is lost, it's better than letting them have it. No. Kai said, his geologist's mind working furiously. Destroying it might cause a catastrophic feedback into the nexus. Unpredictable. There has to be another way. Can you use your language to overload their weapons? Or disable their armor? Lyra considered this. Their technology is crude compared to this. But it has its own song, a discordant one. Perhaps if I can find the counter-resonance. She closed her eyes again, her lips moving, testing syllables. The K'tharr were getting closer. One of them managed to get a clear shot at a section of the shield that seemed to be weakening. It buckled but held. Kai? Lyra said, her eyes still closed. There's a harmonic frequency in their energy weapon capacitors. If I can broadcast a precise inverse pulsate, it should cause a cascading overload. But I need a focal point, something to amplify and direct it. Their commander's weapon, it's more advanced, more resonant. Kai understood. You want me to get close to Varkos? A suicide mission, essentially. But he looked at Lyra, at the trust in her unseen gaze, at the K'tharr cowering nearby, and at the memory of Oren fallen. His impatience, his calm under pressure, it all coalesced into a single point of decision. Tell me what to do. When I give the signal a single, high-pitched chime from the crystal, you need to be within 5 meters of him. The pulse will be localized, but intense. It should disable most of their energy weapons in the vicinity. And Varkos himself. Hopefully, it will give him a very bad headache. Lyra said, a grim hint of humor in her voice. Kai took a deep breath. He looked for anything he could use. His eyes fell on a section of the cavern wall, where the glowing moss grew particularly thick, nourished by a trickle of water. The ground there was slick, muddy. An idea sparked. He began to move, not directly towards Varkos, but circuitously, using the chaotic firefight and the K'tharr's focus on Lyra's shield as cover. He moved like a shadow, his earlier impatience replaced by a hunter's focus. He remembered navigating treacherous ice fields on Europa Prime, where one wrong step meant a frozen death. This was no different, just warmer. Varkos, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated. Concentrate fire on that shield! It cannot hold forever! He stepped forward, trying to get a better angle, unknowingly moving closer to the slick patch Kai had noted. Kai reached his position, hidden behind a rock outcrop. He was close. Too close, he could smell the ozone from Varkos's weapon. He waited, his heart pounding, listening for Lyra's signal. The cavern was a hellish symphony of weapon fire, ricochets, and the deep, resonant hum of the precursor device. Lyra's concentration was absolute. He could feel the power building in her, a focused, controlled storm. Then, it came a single, piercingly clear chime, like a crystal bell struck in a silent room. It cut through the chaos, vibrating in Kai's very bones. Now, Kai! Lyra's voice, amplified by the crystal, echoed through the cavern. Kai burst from cover, not attacking, but sprinting directly towards Varkos, yelling, Look out! The ceiling is unstable! He feigned a stumble, his arms flailing, kicking out with his foot to send a spray of slick mud and loose gravel directly under Varkos's boots. Varkos, startled by the sudden appearance and the warning, instinctively looked up. His heavy armored boots skidded on the treacherous patch. He flailed, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the roof of the cavern. At that exact moment, Lyra unleashed the pulse. It wasn't an explosion. It was a wave of pure, dissonant energy. Kai felt it pass through him, a jarring, unpleasant thrum that made his teeth ache and his hair stand on end. The K'tharr weapons in the immediate vicinity sparked, sputtered, and died. Warning lights flashed on their armor. Several soldiers clutched their helmets, disoriented. Varkos, already off balance, roared in pain as the pulse hit him. His advanced weapon exploded in his hands, showering him with sparks and knocking him to the ground. He lay there, groaning, his armor smoking. The sudden silence from the K'tharr weapons was deafening. Only the hum of the precursor crystal and Lyra's ragged breathing remained. It worked. Kai breathed, amazed. He looked at Lyra. She was pale, swaying, the silver glow around her diminished, but she was smiling faintly. The remaining K'tharr soldiers, their primary weapons useless, looked confused and vulnerable. The K'tharr, seeing their chance, surged forward, not with weapons of war, but with nets woven from tough vines and heavy wooden clubs. They were no match for armed K'tharr, but against disarmed and disoriented ones, they were surprisingly effective. The fight, if it could be called that, was short and decisive. The K'tharr were quickly subdued, disarmed, and bound. Kai rushed to Lyra's side as the shield around her flickered and died. She sagged against the crystal, exhausted but triumphant. The volcano. It's calmer now. The device is soothing it. You did it, Lyra, Kai said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her arm. The contact was warm, real. You saved them. You saved us. Lyra leaned into his touch, a weary sigh escaping her. We did it, Kai, together. Her eyes, still holding a trace of silver, met his. The professional distance of the food critic, the aloofness of the Fluxion was gone. In its place was a raw vulnerability, a deep connection forged in fire and shared purpose. He saw his own relief, his admiration, reflected there. And something more. Something that made his heart beat faster, for an entirely different reason. He found himself leaning closer, drawn by an irresistible force. Her scent, a faint, exotic fragrance like crushed star petal and ozone, filled his senses. Her lips, slightly parted, were an invitation. He hesitated for only a moment, then closed the distance. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, a culmination of all the fear, the adrenaline, the shared danger, and the burgeoning, unspoken emotions that had been arsing between them. It tasted of sulfur and ancient power, of sweat and survival, of relief and a dawning, terrifying hope. Lyra's arms went around his neck, pulling him closer. He could feel the faint thrum of her unique energy, a subtle taste of her essence, not of emotion this time, but of her very being. It was intoxicating. When they finally broke apart, gasping for breath, the cavern was quiet except for the soft murmur of the K'tharr tending to their own. Varkos and his surviving soldiers were being securely bound. The immediate threat was over. Lyra rested her forehead against Kai's. I felt that, Kai, not as sustenance, as you. I felt you too, he whispered, his voice rough. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life had irrevocably changed. The celebrated chef, the hidden exo-geologist, those were just facets. This, being with Lyra, facing the universe together, felt like his true calling. But their respite was short-lived. As the K'tharr began to tend to their captured enemies, one of the K'tharr soldiers, seemingly unconscious, suddenly lunged, a concealed vibro knife appearing in his hand. He wasn't aiming for Kai or Lyra, but for the precursor crystal. The crystal, Lyra screamed, pushing herself away from Kai. Before anyone could react, the K'tharr plunged the vibro knife deep into a shimmering conduit at the base of the crystal. There was a horrific, tearing sound, like reality itself ripping apart. The precursor device, moments before a beacon of calm, pulsed erratically with violent, clashing colors. The ground began to shake again, not with the volcanic tremors, but with something far more unstable, far more terrifying. Has destabilized the nexus conduit. Lyra cried, her face paling in horror. The device was regulating it. Without that regulation, a vortex of swirling, distorted light erupted from the damaged section of the crystal. It grew rapidly, pulling at everything in the cavern: rocks, debris, K'tharr, even the bound K'tharr soldiers. A howling, multidimensional wind filled the air. It's creating a rift. A pocket dimension? Kai yelled, grabbing Lyra's hand, his geologist's mind instantly recognizing the signs of catastrophic spatial distortion. We have to get out of here! But there was nowhere to go. The vortex was expanding, consuming the cavern. Commander Varkos, who had managed to struggle to his feet, laughed, a wild, triumphant sound even as he was pulled towards the swirling chaos. Fools! You think you've won? The hegemony planned for this? A contained reality! A perfect testing ground for the constructor. Once we retrieve it from the primary nexus point. And you, Fluxion? You will help us unlock its full potential? His ladder was cut short as he was sucked into the vortex. The K'tharr soldier who had stabbed the crystal was also consumed, a look of fanatic zeal on his face. Kai and Lyra clung to each other, trying to anchor themselves against the incredible pull. The K'tharr were screaming, being drawn inexorably towards the rift. Lyra, your language? Can you close it? Kai shouted over the dimensional roar. I don't know. It's too chaotic. The energies are tearing reality apart. Lyra yelled back, her voice filled with despair. She tried to speak the ancient words, but they were lost in the maelstrom. Then, she looked at the precursor device at the wound in its side. The crystal, it's trying to heal itself. But the damage is too severe. It needs a sacrifice. An essence. To seal the breach from the other side. She looked at Kai, her eyes filled with a terrible understanding. One of the K'tharr mentioned their death rituals, absorbing memory's essence. Before Kai could fully process her words, Lyra did something entirely unexpected. She pushed him away, hard, towards a section of the cavern wall that was still relatively intact. Live Kai, for both of us. Then, she turned and deliberately launched herself towards the swirling, unstable heart of the vortex, her body glowing with that intense silver light. As she neared the rift, she began to chant in the cipher of ancients, her voice now impossibly clear, cutting through the dimensional howl. It was not a song of control this time, but a song of binding, of sealing. Kai watched in horror, helpless. Lyra. No. As Lyra reached the very edge of the tearing reality, she looked back at him, a fleeting, heartbreaking smile on her face. Then she was gone, consumed by the chaotic light. For a moment the vortex flared even brighter, then, with a sound like a dying star's last breath, it began to shrink. The pulling sensation lessened, the howling wind subsided. The precursor crystal pulsed once, a deep, mournful blue, and then its light began to fade, the intricate patterns slowing, dimming. The ground stabilized. Silence descended on the cavern, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the whimpers of the surviving K'tharr. The rift was gone. In its place, the precursor crystal stood, scarred and dimmed but intact. The immediate danger to the planet, to the nexus, seemed to have passed. But Lyra was gone. Kai stood there, shaking, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. He had faced death many times on desolate moons and collapsing planetary crusts. But this was an agony beyond words. He had found an unexpected union, across the stars, fought for a love he hadn't even dared to name, and now, he stumbled towards the crystal, his hand outstretched, as if he could somehow reach through the fabric of reality and pull her back. His fingers brushed the cool, scarred surface where the rift had been. He felt nothing. Just cold, dead crystal. One of the K'tharr elders, a female this time, approached him cautiously. She touched his arm gently, her large dark eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own. She made a soft, clicking sound, a sound of mourning. Kai sank to his knees, the fight, the adrenaline, the hope, all draining out of him, leaving him empty. He had been calm under pressure his whole life. But this pressure, the pressure of this loss, was crushing him. Days turned into weeks on the K'tharr world. The volcano, though still grumbling, did not erupt catastrophically. The precursor device, though diminished, still exerted its calming influence. Kai helped the K'tharr rebuild, his chef's precision and geologist's knowledge finding new, grim purpose in shoring up cave walls and purifying water sources. He worked mechanically, his grief a constant, silent companion. He barely ate, barely slept. There was no creative frustration for Lyra to feed on now, only a vast, barren landscape of despair. He learned more about the K'tharr. They were ancient, peaceful, and deeply connected to their world. They mourned Lyra as one of their own, performing quiet rituals in her honor. They told him stories of the star singers who had come before, leaving behind their great machines, and of prophecies that spoke of another singer who would one day return to awaken the old songs. They believed Lyra was that singer. One evening, as Kai sat staring into the dying embers of a fire, the female elder, whose name was Liana, approached him. She held something in her hands, a small, smooth, gray stone faintly warm to the touch. "She is not entirely gone, Skywalker Kai," Liana said, her galactic standard surprisingly fluent, learned from some ancient data crystal perhaps. When she sealed the rift, she did not just sacrifice herself. She merged with it. With the nexus. A part of her essence is woven into the fabric of that place. Kai looked at the stone. "What is this?" "A focusing stone," Liana said, "from the heart of the mountain. Sometimes when the veil between worlds is thin, one can hear echoes. Feel presences, hold it. Quiet your mind. Listen." Kai took the stone. It felt strangely alive in his hand. He closed his eyes, skeptical yet desperate for any connection. He focused on his grief, on his memory of Lyra, of her courage, her strange beauty, her incandescent spirit. He remembered their kiss, the taste of starlight and shared hope. And then faintly, so faintly he thought he was imagining it, he felt something. A whisper. Not a voice, but a feeling. A sense of her presence, a distant warmth, A familiar thrum of energy, melancholy, creative frustration. I am here. His eyes snapped open. Lyra. The feeling faded, leaving him with an aching sense of longing, but also a spark. A tiny, flickering spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Varkos had spoken of the pocket dimension as a trap, a private domain. He had also mentioned retrieving the universal constructor from the primary nexus point. If Lyra had merged with this nexus conduit, this localized distortion, could she still be somewhere trapped? A new energy surged through Kai, not of despair, but of fierce, desperate resolve. His impatience, his defining trait, was back, but now it had a singular focus. He would not accept her loss. He would find her. He had to. He looked at Lana, the K'tharr commander, Varkos. He said this pocket dimension was a trap, that they planned to use it. Is there any way to access it, to find where it leads? Lana looked troubled. The rift was sealed. To reopen would be incredibly dangerous. It could destroy this world. But if Lyra is in there, trapped, Kai persisted. She saved your world. We have to try to save her. Lana was silent for a long moment. Then, she nodded slowly. There is one legend. One dangerous ritual. It speaks of using the heart of the mountain not to calm the world, but to briefly thin the veil, to peer into the spaces between. But it requires a great emotional catalyst. A powerful, focused emotion, and someone who can navigate those currents. Kai looked at the focusing stone in his hand. He thought of Lyra. He thought of his grief, his despair, but also his burgeoning, desperate love. He was a chef. He knew how to focus creative energy. He was an exo-geologist. He knew how to navigate treacherous terrains. And he was a man who had just found and lost the center of his universe. Tell me what I need to do, Kai said, his voice hoarse but firm. His calm under pressure was a mask now, hiding a maelstrom of determination. He would tear reality apart if he had to. The ritual was complex, dangerous. It involved Kai focusing all his emotional energy, his love, his grief, his hope, his despair into the focusing stone, while Lyanna and the other K'tharr shamans chanted, using their own connection to the planet to try and guide the energy towards the scarred precursor device. They warned him that the pocket dimension was likely unstable, a chaotic reflection of the K'tharr's twisted ambitions and the raw energies of the nexus. Kai sat before the dimmed heart of the mountain, the focusing stone clutched in his hand. He closed his eyes and let himself feel everything. The joy of her smile, the frustration of her critiques, the terror of the crash, the triumph in the cavern, the searing pain of her sacrifice. He poured it all into the stone, a raw, unfiltered torrent of his very soul. He felt Lyra's subtle sustenance needs, the way she absorbed complex emotions, and he offered his own, a feast of longing and determination. The stone grew hot in his hand, almost unbearably so. The precursor crystal before him began to flicker with an erratic, unstable light. The air in the cavern grew cold, and the familiar, terrifying howl of a dimensional wind began to whisper around them. It is opening, Skywalker Kai, Lyanna cried, her voice strained. But it will not hold for long. You must be quick. Kai opened his eyes. Before him, where the rift had been, was not a raging vortex, but a shimmering, oily tear in reality. It looked like a heat haze over a dark, starless void. He could feel an immense, chaotic pressure emanating from it. This was Varkos's pocket dimension. He didn't hesitate. With Lyra's name a prayer on his lips, he stepped through the tear. The transition was sickening, like being turned inside out and squeezed through a microscopic hole. He landed, gasping, on what felt like solid ground, though it shifted and warped beneath his feet. The sky above was a chaotic swirl of impossible colors and fractured geometries. Strange, half-formed structures rose and fell in the distance, like a city built by a mad god. This place was a prison, a trap, and a testament to the K'tharr's hubris. Lyra, he yelled, his voice sounding thin and distorted in the alien atmosphere. Lyra, can you hear me? He stumbled forward, calling her name, searching for any sign of her. The landscape was a nightmare, constantly shifting. Illusions, far more powerful and malevolent than Lyra's, flickered at the edges of his vision, trying to confuse and disorient him. He fought them off, focusing on the image of Lyra, on the faint warmth he'd felt from the focusing stone. And then, he saw it. In the center of a warped, crystalline plaza was a dais. And on that dais, suspended in a cage of crackling, dark energy, was Lyra. She was pale, her eyes closed, but she was unmistakably alive. Her silver glow was faint, almost extinguished. Commander Varkos stood before the cage, his armor repaired, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Several K'tharr technicians were working on a complex console nearby, which hummed with an ominous power. And next to it, Kai saw it the universal constructor. It wasn't a grand machine, but a sleek obsidian sphere, pulsing with contained energy, already beginning to extrude complex metallic shapes from raw nothingness. "Welcome, Chef," Varkos said, without turning. "I wondered if your attachment would lead you here." "Predictable." "Let her go, Varkos," Kai demanded, his hand instinctively going to the multi-tool still clipped to his belt. "A pitiful weapon against this." Varkos chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "She is vital to my plans. Her unique ability to interface with precursor technology, her emotional resonance. It allows us to fine-tune the constructor, to bypass its more unpredictable safety protocols. Soon, we will reshape reality to our precise specifications. A galaxy of order. Of purity." "You're insane," Kai spat. "Sanity is subjective," Varkos replied, turning to face him. "The Federation is decadent and weak. Only through absolute control can true peace be achieved. The Fluxion understands power. She will serve the hegemony willingly or not." He gestured to Lyra. "She resists, of course, but her will is weakening. This pocket dimension, it feeds on chaos, and her emotional output, her distress, only makes it stronger, more stable for our purposes." A beautiful irony, don't you think? Kai looked at Lyra. Even unconscious, he could feel her struggle, her defiance, and he could feel her hunger, magnified by her imprisonment and the draining effect of the cage. "Lyra," he called out, projecting all his love, his determination. "Lyra, I'm here." Her eyelids flickered. Slowly her head lifted. Her silver eyes, dull with exhaustion, found his. A spark of recognition, of hope, ignited within them. "Kai?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hold on." Varkos sneered. Touching, but futile. He gestured to his guards. "Dispose of him." 2 K'tharr soldiers advanced on Kai, their energy rifles raised. Kai knew he couldn't fight them head-on. He had to rely on his wits, his calm under pressure, and maybe, just maybe, the unstable nature of this pocket dimension itself. He dodged the first blast, using a shifting pillar of rock as momentary cover. He remembered Lyra's illusions. He couldn't create them, but perhaps he could use the environment. He focused on his impatience, his rage at Varkos, channeling it, imagining the ground beneath the soldiers becoming quicksand. It didn't, of course. He wasn't a Fluxion. But Lyra, seeing his intent, her eyes locking with his, seemed to understand. A faint shimmer emanated from her cage. The ground beneath the advancing K'tharr soldiers suddenly buckled, not into quicksand, but into a jagged, confusing maze of razor